Good morning. I'm Catherine Newcomer. I'm a faculty member in the George Washington University's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. It's a center for public service education, graduate level, master's and PhD programming at the George Washington University. We have been preparing students to go out and work in government and the nonprofit sector in providing public services for since 1963. We've had degrees. And one of the topics that has become increasingly important is grants management, given our federal system and the immense amount of money that goes out to support services delivered across the country. It's a topic that has been near and dear to my heart for many years, teaching at George Washington and teaching about public management and the evaluation of what we do. And so I was delighted to partner with my buddy, Jeff Myers, who you're going to hear from in a minute, at REI, to bring together the grants management community. And we started the survey many years ago that we are able to track what people are thinking and concerned about. And I am just delighted to be here to listen with you, to hear the latest results, and to also hear from practitioners like you about what they think about them. So again, from the Trachtenberg School at GW, I am delighted to welcome you, and I'm excited to listen. And I'm going to turn this over to my buddy, my partner since the beginning, and it used to be in-person breakfasts, but this morning session on grants management. Thank you. And thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Kathy, and welcome as well from me and from REI Systems to all of you. We started this event and series in partnership with George Washington University, frankly, to try and kind of identify what are problems facing grants managers, be they grantors or grant recipients or people who do all sorts of jobs, including both of those. We also, frankly, started it to share ideas about folks who'd been successful and had ideas to offer to others, or about folks who were facing challenges and needed ideas to kind of help build and create a sense of community. And with that in mind, I'm going to invite all of you to think about, what topics are you concerned about? What kinds of questions do these survey results bring up for you, and to raise questions, because we've got some great panelists who I'll introduce in a minute who will help answer a number of those questions. Also, one of our purposes, frankly, is to try and advocate for grants managers, and whether it be things like advocating for better career paths or advocating for changes to grants management legislation or changes to administration priorities, we see this together, especially with both George Washington University and the National Grants Management Association, as an opportunity to kind of put a loud voice behind the priorities that you help share with us and that are important to you. Let me very briefly introduce REI Systems, and then I'll introduce our panelists as well. For those of you who aren't familiar, REI Systems has actually been in the grants management space for more than 30 years. In fact, we started out as a grant recipient, a small business innovation and research grant made through the NASA, helping them explore ways to innovate in essentially kind of processing at that stage grant applications and other decisions on the internet back in the late 1980s, when the internet was a relatively new thing. We quickly turned around and NASA said, hey, we like what you've done. Can we implement some of these ideas? And so we've supported NASA ever since. Every year or every 5 years, they renew their contract with us. We've moved beyond NASA to help both identify opportunities to solve problems in the grants management space, in case management, in analytics, in consulting, and in technology generally. And we're focused fairly heavily right now on artificial intelligence, thinking about ways that artificial intelligence, for example, can be used to make a grant administrator's job easier and more efficient, and to reduce burden on both grantors as well as grantees. So we'll have occasional presentations that we would invite you all to that will help you think about, well, other folks are trying, or members of industry are coming up with innovations. Is that something you'd like to try on a pilot basis, or you just want to kind of watch and wait and see how it that turns out for a while. So that's kind of the introductions for REI and this event and series. Let me now introduce our panelists, and then what will happen next is my colleague Heather Morgan will present the results of the grants management survey. You'll have a chance to think about them a little bit and then be able to ask questions of our panelists. Just to make sure they kind of have a little bit of a chance to prepare. We've got a few questions that we have pre-prepared, but again, your participation and what's important to you is important to us. And so you're welcome to address the questions in general in the question box and or the chat box. And you can either name a particular panelist or you can let us choose and we'll suggest which panelist it should go to. Our panelists include Scott Schaefer, who is the president of the National Grants Management Association. He is also a partner at the law firm of Feldman & Leifer, has a significant experience within the federal government working with the Navy, and actually is a product of George Washington University. So thanks, Kathy, and thanks to GWU here in DC. As well, we have Chad Clifford, who is the executive director within HHS's Office of Grants and what's called the Quality Shared Services Management Organization, which essentially helps a wide range of federal grant making agencies improve, succeed, have the right tools, the right training to be able to be effective grant managers. Chad has previous experience working in grants and as well in legal issues at FEMA, which is, you know, as a major federal grants maker, as well at the executive office of the president within OMB, the Office of Federal Financial Management, which helps set grants making policy government wide. Chad as well is a product of George Washington University, in this case, the law school. And that brings us to the only person apparently who has no affiliation with George Washington University. Ashley Gain is a community development project manager in San Diego. She's a grant recipient and also does a little bit of grant making towards community development in the San Diego area. She has previous experience as well with AmeriCorps, the Public Building Service, and my favorite, Disneyland. So those are the folks. We can always try to kind of have a range of panelists who will be able to give you perspectives of kind of federal government wide, of grantor, of grant recipient, to kind of help think through what are some of the best potential answers from their experience, which may or may not apply to, of course, everyone else's experience as well, but gives you a real sense of kind of, well, what does this survey answer mean? What might it mean in the particular context of at least one or another of the perspectives of grantor, grant recipient, and so forth. What I'm going to do finally, and again, I'm going to ask our panelists to step aside for just a moment so that Heather Morgan, my colleague at REI Systems, can share with you the results of the annual grant survey. And I look forward to hearing your questions and having this discussion about it. So off to the races, Heather.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeff. Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Morgan, and I lead our grants and SBIR offering at REI Systems. Today, I'll be sharing the results of the annual grants management survey that closed at the end of December. There's a lot to cover, and I'd like to keep the presentation to no more than 30 minutes, so we have plenty of time to hear from our panel. So if you have questions, please post them, and we will do our best to answer them after the panel or post-session. For today's agenda, I'll give a quick overview of how the survey was conducted and who the respondents were. Then we'll look at key data and insights for each section of the survey, and we'll end with a summary of the key takeaways. Once my presentation's over, we'll move directly into the panel discussion where the panelists will be sharing their own experiences and insights into some of the findings. REI Systems, in collaboration with the National Grants Management Association and George Washington University's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration, have been conducting the annual grants management survey since 2016 to keep a pulse on the grants community, understand the context in which you work, what's going well, and identify current challenges, priorities, and opportunities for improvement. We believe the survey's results can help the grants community by providing visibility and transparency to common problems, as well as help advocate for what you need. This is the 8th year that we've conducted the online grants management survey, so we are able to track trends over time with the ultimate goal of creating a positive impact on grants management. Since we do look to maximize the opportunity to evaluate trend of responses across years, you'll see consistency in the questions that are being asked from year to year. However, we do make some revisions each year to adjust for current issues in the changing environment. Thousands of grants professionals are invited to respond each year. I hope many of you attended today, did participate in this year's. And while we've received enough responses that we believe it offers valuable information, just do want to note that we can't ensure a fair cross-section of grant managers participating. Responses are treated as anonymous, and respondents who did opt to provide the contact information will be provided a copy of the results that are being shared today. And we always look for feedback on the survey. So if you participated in the survey or have feedback based on what you hear today, please feel free to share those inputs. We welcome suggestions for improvement, and we'll take that into consideration for the next survey. So I'd like to start by highlighting the biggest survey findings, and then we'll go ahead and dig into the details. One of the new questions we added this year was on whether organizations are incorporating DEIA initiatives within their grants processes in response to the executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. We're encouraged to see that this is happening across the different phases of the grants life cycle, most heavily in the pre-award stage, for which over 50% of respondents indicated progress. Second, to help reduce burden on both grantors and grant recipients, respondents want more standardization, simplification, and automation. And then on the technology side, respondents noted a number of concerns, including volume of grant systems that they're required to interact with, lack of system-to-system interfaces, poor user experience, high cost to maintain, et cetera. So they're really looking for more modern, customizable solutions that are affordable and easy to use with more standardization across government. And then lastly, the need for well-trained and capable staff remains a significant theme again this year, with 72% of survey respondents indicating that qualified staff is the most significant success factor for grants management, and 48% saying that retaining them is the biggest challenge. So now we'll go ahead and look at the survey demographics. We had 659 responses this year, narrowly beating our record count from last year, which was 643. Our federal participation almost doubled this year, which is fantastic. The largest share of respondents are from the non-government community, which represents the significant role they play in providing grant services. And you'll notice that a large number of the survey respondents wear both the grant maker and the grant recipient hat, as reflected by the blue bars that you're seeing on the chart. And then in terms of years of experience, more than half of respondents have deep grants experience of 10 years or more. And looking at the administrative budget against the total annual value of grants processed, we see that numbers have improved for the majority of organizations, but still are on the high side, with the average across organizations at around 9.2%. And now we'll look at the details around the grants management processes and activities, as well as legislation that impacts grants management. So this survey question focuses on the amount of time spent on grants management tasks, from pre-award activities, including application submissions and reviews, to post-award activities like monitoring administrative requirements and evaluating program outcomes and impacts. It also includes other activities like program policy and design. So we're showing the top 5 on this slide for readability. And we're continuing to see that administrative monitoring, both financial and non-financial, is consistently consuming over 35% of grant managers' time. In response to the feedback, in terms of respondent feedback that came in on the write-in portions, we're seeing challenges with the complex and intricate regulatory and reporting requirements, which can vary widely based on the funding agency and the type of grant. Also, a significant amount of administrative burden can be tied to corrective actions. So more effort needs to be put on fixing the root cause, which can be accomplished with things like improved clear guidance, standardization, process reengineering, and more automation. Another challenge is the lack of efficiency and coordination across agencies and across departments, which can result in duplication of effort, inconsistency, and conflict. We are seeing legislation like the Uniform Guidance to CFR 200 and the GRADE Act helping with simplifying and standardizing the grants processes, but many are still struggling with conflicting guidance, lack of adequate tools, often still relying on spreadsheets. Here we're assessing the organization and its operational environment. While marginally lower than last year, overall scores remain high, particularly around successfully meeting mission objectives. And this one looks at whether the grant recipients and subrecipients' performance outcomes have improved or not. Similar to prior years, about half of respondents don't know or are unable to effectively measure outcomes. Of those who can, only 5% indicated that performance fell. And since this has been a recurring theme, we did add a new question to the survey to better understand the challenges around collecting and analyzing performance outcomes. What we found was that the lack of staff and tools were identified as the top reasons, followed by lack of defined performance measures to be able to analyze the outcome data. With lack of tools, there are multiple layers of challenges there. One is having tools to collect the data where it exists. And then once you've collected that data at source, being able to aggregate it effectively and report on it. Things like online surveys, mobile data collection apps, or data management systems can help streamline the process and the data analysis and improve accuracy. At the recent NGMA annual grants training event last week, there was a roundtable discussion focused on this very topic. And another challenge that resonated with the attendees of that session was on the people aspect of data collection. You may have the tools, but it can still be challenging to get people to respond, especially in resource-constrained environments or when working with populations that may be difficult to reach or hesitant to provide information. So a number are using things like surveys, but are having trouble getting responses. In terms of best practices shared during that roundtable discussion, one that really resonated with folks was around clearly defining the objectives and goals of the grant up front, including the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, and then determining the specific metrics that will indicate whether the grant recipient is meeting those desired outcomes. So it's really worth spending time on that upfront to refine and baseline the metrics. But also people talked about the benefit of involving other stakeholders, including grant recipients, community members, and funding organizations in the KPI development and in the monitoring and evaluation processes whenever possible, because their input can really provide valuable perspectives and insights. This one looks at how we're aligning with Executive Order 13985. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEIA, is an administration priority. We added this new question to survey whether organizations are incorporating DEIA initiatives within their grants processes in response to the Executive Order on advancing racial equity and supports for underserved communities. DEIA should be considered in every stage of the grants life cycle to meet the administration's executive order standards. And we're encouraged to see that this is happening most heavily in the pre-award stage. That includes things like simplifying the NOFO language and improving the application process, for which about 50% of respondents indicated progress in that pre-award stage. And in looking at the impact of legislation on grants management and how it impacts day-to-day activities, we're seeing that the uniform grant guidance is still viewed as having the biggest positive impact. The proposed revisions to uniform guidance should help make compliance with the rules even easier, reducing burden on agencies and the recipients. And then the Data Act, Single Audit Act Amendment, and the GREAT Act all have similar results showing just a moderate impact. The GREAT Act continues to be an area of focus for HHS Office of Grants and the Grants CUSMO, who have ongoing efforts to advance federal grants data standards, including the Federal Integrated Business Framework, or FIBF. So this should further help strengthen agency management and oversight of federal grants, making system-to-system automation easier and decreasing the burden on both grantors and recipients. So now we'll look at grants management systems and data. Automation and grant reporting continues to be a pain point. We did see some improvement with direct data entry, which is now just over 30%. However, emails are still a common method for reporting, which directly increases burden and can lead to potential errors. More online data systems for grant reporting are needed to help automate and streamline the data collection process, as well as more system-to-system automation to minimize redundancy and reduce the burden on the grantees. And the respondent write-in feedback, we're seeing a desire to consolidate and standardize grant management systems. Some are also seeking shared services as well. So this is in alignment with the goals of the Grants CUSMO, who's working to help make that happen in the federal space. So there are a couple of new data points we started collecting this year on the number of unique grant systems that organizations are required to interact with and the number of staff members that use them. While the majority of organizations are using between 2 to 7 systems by 10 or less staff, 10% of agencies are using more than 7 systems and 34% have 10 or more staff using the systems. And the write-in feedback, a consistent technology challenge reported was the number of grant systems that they have to learn and use and the lack of system-to-system integrations. And then in looking at data that should be shared in an automated manner, we see that across the grant lifecycle, this is viewed as important. Leadership across grant-making agencies are very interested in the data being collected and how to effectively use it to make informed data-driven business decisions and effectively measure the impact of the grants on the program mission. In order for automated data sharing to be effective, we need technology and data systems to establish connections, agree on the data elements to be shared, and the tools to facilitate the analysis. And in looking at advances in technology, as we've seen in prior years, data standards for grants management received the highest percentages, likely due to the GREAT Act that we spoke about earlier. And while we're seeing some progress in leveraging advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and robotic process automation, most organizations aren't there yet. This year, we expanded the question on AI to ask about generative AI, which is a really hot topic right now, thanks to ChatGPT and other similar apps. Most organizations are not using this yet. Of the few that do, they indicated Gen AI is being used to help with things like writing budget narratives and summaries. And now we'll look at the level of training that is currently being provided both to grant makers and grant recipients. Less than half of organizations recommend and offer training to its grant recipients, and only 18% actually require grant recipients take training. This is slightly up from last year's 15%. Respondents overwhelmingly stress the importance of training, which leads to better performance, higher quality, and lower costs. Providing training and assistance to recipients is something that we really need to see grant makers continuing to do more of. And then for grant organizations, only 49% require that their staff receive grants management training. That's up 9% from the prior year, but it's still quite low considering the importance of well-qualified staff, which we continue to see as an important success factor. We also saw an increase on training certification requirements, which went up by 7% to 23%. We know that the size of a grant program, the grant program offices is growing in order to handle the influx of funding and the increased volume of grants. Grant specialists and managers need a wide array of skills, right, from finance and budget to project management, analytical skills, et cetera, that often require very specific training depending on their role. So with the new staff and heavy workload, we're left with that recurring question of why don't more organizations require training for their grant staff to set them up for success and enable more effective grants oversight. And when looking at how long it takes to fully train or ramp up a new resource to independently perform their grants management functions, you'll see here that 38% indicated it takes 1 to 2 years to fully train, and 11% indicate it takes more than 2 years to train. So this really emphasizes the importance of retaining well-qualified staff. A new question was added this year on specific areas where grant staff would benefit from receiving additional training. The second biggest area cited by respondents after comprehensive grants management training was on regulations, uniform guidance, and compliance. So the need for clear legislation and regulations was also a popular theme in the areas for improvement. So staying compliant with evolving regulations and varying agency requirements we're seeing is just a constant challenge. Other top areas identified were around financial management, monitoring, and how to write a successful grant. Now we'll take a look at success factors and challenges. So here are the top success factors that organizations have had in grants management in recent years. So if we focus on the top three, well-qualified grants management staff continues to be the key factor in grants program success year after year. Clear communication about the grant's mission came in second this year, and not surprisingly, effective training for recipients came in third. And here we see the most significant challenges. And looking at the top three, attracting and retaining well-qualified staff is still the most significant challenge facing grants management. Funding uncertainty and susceptibility to politics came in second this year, followed by inefficient processes. We also started tracking ineffective grant systems last year based on the write-in feedback we were getting, and we're seeing about 25% identifying that as a major challenge. And this focuses on the write-in responses to the highest priorities or best ways to improve grants management. And we're seeing that they naturally align to three main buckets in terms of people, process, and technology. With regards to people, the recurring themes include well-trained and capable staff with the need for better retention and capacity building, support from leadership, and stronger communication and collaboration. Related to process, a number of the respondents are wanting clearer legislation and regulations with less conflicting guidance and more standardization, streamlined business processes and reporting, better internal controls, and enhanced transparency. And then with regards to technology, priorities included affordable and adaptable systems and technology, improved user experience so that systems are easier to navigate and utilize, unified full lifecycle grants management systems, and automated data sharing, including system-to-system integration. All of these on this slide closely align with the successes and challenges that we noted on the prior slides. And when we ask what your priorities are going to be over the next 3 years, we see training, staff, and systems as the biggest focus areas. Again, very much in alignment with what we saw on the previous slides. And now I will wrap things up quickly by summarizing the key takeaways from this year's survey. So first, DEIA initiatives are being considered in each phase of the grants lifecycle, with pre-award phase currently getting the most focus. Next, retention of well-qualified staff and building capacity is key to successful grants management. 72% of survey respondents indicating qualified staff is the most significant success factor. Next, respondents want more training. They're looking for accessible, affordable options with comprehensive grants management training most in demand. Fourth, challenges with grants management systems are fueling the demand for more modern, configurable, and standardized solutions. Next, clear and consistent legislation, regulations, and guidance is desired for better compliance. And last but not least, standardizing, streamlining, and automating processes and reporting to decrease burden on staff. And that concludes my presentation. So I will pass it back over to Jeff Myers, who will be moderating today's panel. Jeff.
Thanks very much, Heather. That is a great set of information, and I think it prompts a number of questions. I would like, especially for all of our audience members, to invite you to click on the chat and type your questions into the chat. Feel free to ask any question you like. And in particular, I have a couple of things that I hope you might ask about, or perhaps you can offer ideas. So, for example, have you found that DEIA has helped improve the effectiveness of your grant program? Does it improve people's perceptions of fairness? Does it perhaps improve trust in the kind of the mission purposes of your fund program that is funded by the government? In contrast, if you're using artificial intelligence and it's found it's really helpful to you, or that there are some potholes that you would suggest be identified, please share with your colleagues here and let's have a conversation about that. If you have ideas about how to reduce grant administration burden and to put more energy into the mission purpose and less energy into kind of mindless tasks, please share what your experience is or what you would like to see happen. That some of the federal officials who listen into this will get your perspective. And if you, with your employees are having a terrific success or a big challenge with retention, tell us about it and help get some perspective from both the panelists as well as your colleagues. I'm going to invite the panelists to come back online on the video. And once again, our panelists are Scott Shuffler, the president of the National Grants Management Association, Chad Clifford, the executive director of within the Office of Grants at the Health and Human Services and executive director of the Quality Shared Services Management Organization, and Ashley Gain, community development project manager for the city of San Diego. Thank you once again to the panelists. And let me start out. I'll always ask provoking questions. Again, I want to encourage our audience members to type their questions into the chat. But let me start out with the DEIA topic. And I'm curious, Ashley Keaton, if you could move us to slide 14. The question I have there is, again, kind of your perspective on your organization's efforts with DEIA. what's been the impact? What's been the result? Perhaps in part it's intended maybe to increase perceptions of fairness. Has it done that? Maybe Chad, you could take a lead and others can certainly join in if you like.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? I know we did sound check before, make sure. Great. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. So part of my role at HHS in their Office of Grants, particularly in the last 6 or 7
Ashley,
months.
could you move to slide 14, please?
There you go.
Okay.
So what are we doing in terms of equity in the EO? There's a lot happening at HHS. So let me share a few things that I've seen, both in particular though, there's a lot of work happening in the policy space. And there's work driven across the entire department led by the Secretary's office with the whole equity team, but in the grants office, my perspective is, one way to really do this is to find ways to open doors, reduce barriers to entry for our applicants and recipients. And one of the best ways to do that is to start at the beginning. Start at the beginning of the grants process and think about how we do program design, how we send out and write our NOFOs, how we invite applicants into the space, and then how we make it easier for them. So there are a few things here would like to highlight that we've done at the department. First, work on NOFOs. Really, really great to see HHS in the last year or so taking an effort to simplify our NOFOs. And this has been a major effort, really tied into this equity work specifically, but also really to help just reduce the burden and toil. But also, thinking about, Jeff, you talk about, fairness, and fairness is opportunity and to bring in new audiences, new communities, right? Where, if it's harder for them to apply for a grant, they may just walk away. So how can we make it easier? Well, one way is to make those NOFOs easier to read, make them shorter, make it more clear what the outcomes we're trying to seek are, so they can match up with the right programs. And we've had some good early success with prototyping and doing human-centered design to really improve those NOFOs, really reducing word counts significantly, 40+%, shrinking, the length of the NOFOs, about a similar way. But I think more importantly, just plain languaging these things, right? So they're easier to understand. And we've had really good feedback from the initial prototypes. And there's a lot of work in the department, working to scale what are some initial NOFOs, one or two or three we've done in the last, few months and year, across to dozens, near 100 NOFOs this year, and then try to scale across the entire department. So there's a lot of work happening in that space, and very similarly, a lot of work on the systems side. From a modernization perspective, thinking about also at the beginning of that process, HHS is the home of grants.gov, and that's run by colleagues of mine in the Office of Grants. Their work to modernize that platform and help simplify search, again, to match up applicants and help them more easily find programs that will benefit them and their communities. And then streamlining the apply function that's available on grants.gov that many agencies use and that is available to all agencies to use. Those are just some of the ways that we at HHS that we're really trying to lean in and implement this executive order and these requirements.
I'm curious, historically, and this is a simplification, in the past, a lot of government agencies, especially at the federal level, have kind of just said, well, we built a great mousetrap. We'll just wait for grant applicants to come and apply for the grants, and we'll consider the folks who apply. And I think there's kind of a little bit of an intention with this executive order of saying, no, don't just wait for folks to come. Go out and look for the people that are underrepresented amongst the grant recipients historically, and look for the people who might have a need but might not know where to come or might not even know that it's a possibility to come and ask for a grant. So is there kind of more proactive outreach that you've seen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, particularly, with a lot of the policy work that I get to help lead now at HHS in the grant space, we've been partnering with our tribal liaison in the department and reaching out through the HHS Secretary's Tribal Advisory Council to do exactly those types of things, Jeff. in terms of promoting and understanding what's there and available for their communities, and particularly targeting communities that are more disadvantaged, underserved communities, folks where the capabilities may be low, but the grants are of the greatest need and can have the greatest impact. The department's been doing that, since my time in the last 7+ months and year, in the broader grants office. Similarly, we've been partnering with our chief diversity officer in the department, who's been doing similar work with HBCUs, and helping promote and help them understand both what's available, as well as connecting them with programs across the department. And the programs are where a lot of the technical assistance is delivered, really help those applicants and recipients, really open up those doors and help bring them in. So that's happening as well.
Great. And Ashley Gain, may I ask, again, with your own experience and to the extent you're kind of aware or want to offer ideas about other experiences of others, and particularly those folks who receive grants from you, are the ways that kind of people can become aware of grant opportunities sufficient? Would you say, hey, you know what, we just have had a couple of folks come and knock on our door, and they weren't sure what door to knock on, and once we started kind of doing X or Y, all of a sudden a lot more folks who had a real need became aware and knew to come and ask. Have you had some sort of experience like that you could share?
Yeah, we definitely have. So if anyone's familiar with HUD Community Development Block Grant Funds, that's what I work under. So we fund specific nonprofits in the area to help kind of bolster community development. And we go through a 5-year cycle of our consolidated planning efforts, which involves a lot of outreach to the community. We host community workshops to hear their needs. So this year we hosted, I think, about 15 community workshops in historically disadvantaged areas of San Diego. And it was really intentional and really specific, targeted outreach for it. And because of that, we saw almost a double in the amount of applicants that we had for this funding cycle. Last year, we were completely oversubscribed, and we had a lot of funds that we had left to reprogram afterwards. But I think because of that outreach that we were doing in the community, and because of a lot of work that we did to, like, along with what Chad was saying, simplify the language, we were working to make it more accessible, make it more focused on their historic outcomes than, being super impressed by a really fancy annual report. We had a much more competitive round of applications this year.
This is kind of jumping to a different topic slightly, but it's interesting on that comment you just made, Ashley. As you see them and you say, hey, we've got more competitive grant applicants, what that tells me to some extent is maybe they're getting better at writing their grant applications, but it also tells me, I hope, hey, these are folks who are going to do a better job making a real impact towards the mission purpose of the grant. And you know what? It used to be that we had folks who were just going to make an average impact, and now we've got folks who are going to make an outstanding impact. Tell me a little bit about, as you're looking through the grant applications, how do you tell kind of hey, this one's going to be outstanding versus this one's average? And then maybe after the fact, how do you tell? Were they really lots better? Because I'm thrilled to hear that.
That's a really interesting question. I will say all of our subrecipients are outstanding. All of the nonprofits in San Diego are doing incredible, outstanding work. So I don't want to disparage anyone with that. I think we kind of see the same types of organizations applying year after year. We do a lot of, food insecurity programs, refugee assistance, things like that. For us this year, it was new programs that were coming and applying, which was great. And that was what we were hoping to see. So I can't really speak to the impact of the awarded organizations yet because we haven't seen what their outcomes are going to be. But in the past, we monitor really closely, and we watch to see what those outcomes are looking like, if they're going to be on track for what they promised. We absolutely believe them when they say that they're going to do all of these wonderful things, but we do monitor it, and it does kind of ding them on future applications if they don't follow through with what they listed out as their goals. So that's kind of one way that we track it. But the other is we do a lot of, it's really a human to human kind of process. So while we use REI and we have our 80 grants platform that everyone's able to kind of input their data onto, we do also track how the progress is going and what adjustments need to be made to their original contract agreements. Just as we're hearing the different needs, if there's like a border influx coming across and we're working with organizations that are serving that, obviously their goals are going to shift from what was originally listed. But it is kind of hard to track, but we are opening a nonprofit academy to hopefully help organizations, newer organizations, meet the goals that they had originally listed out, kind of appropriately scope out things that they thought that they were able to do, and then also work with them on that grant application language so they can still be competitive, even if, you know, they're only serving 15 people. If they're serving those 15 people really, really well, we want to know about it.
So you kind of set up a training program that it sounds like it's kind of general management. It's not just how to be a good compliant grant recipient. And perhaps that's a way to help some of the new grant recipients who are coming in previously weren't part of the process or weren't part of the community. So you're kind of helping them take a step up. That's great. One of the things you said, and Ashley Keaton, if you could advance to slide 18, you said, you know, these are new grant folks. Some of them aren't familiar with some of the systems. And I was kind of astounded by the fact that apparently lots and lots of grant managers responding to our survey said they're using between 2 and 3 systems, which is the kind of the orange or red fit box on the left, or a pie on the wedge on the left, 32%, or 4 to 7. So people are using a lot of different grant systems. And having been in this a while, I understand, you know, you may be, for example, you, Ashley Kane, might be getting some grants from HUD. Maybe you're getting some grants from, I don't know, Department of Commerce, perhaps, and presumably, you know, the city of San Diego is also getting some from HHS, a number of other organizations, and they kind of all have their own system. And so you have to kind of interface with them. And I imagine that's perhaps even as much or more of a challenge, especially for your new grant recipients who aren't really kind of used to it. So my question is, and maybe I'll pose this first to Scott and then see whether or not Chad or Ashley want to kind of respond as well. Is this something where this is kind of, Scott, a major problem for grant recipients having to deal with so many systems? And are there folks who've said, hey, I only wish it could work like X? And so essentially kind of, is it a big problem? And have folks said, hey, we have a solution?
So my perspective, and this comes both from my experience with NGMA as well as my experience working with grantees as an attorney, is that the number of federal systems through which grants are awarded and reports are submitted is a cause of inefficiency. I don't think that it's, if you were to ask grantees, what's your number one problem? In fact, as you did, right? They say we need staff and we need training, staff and training, staff and training. It's not, there's too many systems. But the fact of the number of systems unnecessarily, in my view, from my perspective, does create inefficiencies that drive that staff and training number. I think there's a couple of things that could probably be done at the federal level to resolve that. There's a number of payment systems, right? You have HHS has the payment management system, Treasury runs ASAP. Those have been consolidating. They're not so different that they cause too much heartache, but those could there's no reason there couldn't be just a single system in that regard, which means one account, one authorized user, one set of skills to just navigate the electronic framework. But more importantly, the number of systems that exist for reporting, prior approval requests across various agencies, those could be consolidated. I don't think, I'm going to be honest, I don't think the federal government views it this way or has thought about it this way. But in reality, there's really two main types of awards that drive what the system would look like. You can never fully consolidate, but there are research awards and there are service delivery and infrastructure awards. And if you were to have a system for research and a system for everything else and to consolidate around those two frameworks, I think you could create a lot of efficiencies. So that's on the federal system side. In terms of internal grantee systems, this is sort of down in the weeds, but there are two things that I hear frequently from grantees that would be useful to them. And sometimes they can find them and sometimes they can't. But I'm very surprised that the private sector hasn't created a huge number of these systems. So the first is systems by which an individual who works in their organization that has to do a periodic timesheet to allocate the cost of their time, right, their personnel cost to various cost centers, connects directly to the payroll system, which then connects easily to the financial management system to book those expenses into the right accounts for easy financial reporting. One would think that would exist today, and actually it does, but it's not as commonplace as you would believe. And it requires more configuration than what you would think is necessary with the number of providers out there with that type of software. And the second thing is managing numerous subrecipients. I think partially what we're seeing in the efforts of many federal agencies to reach previously unreached grantee communities or potential grantee communities is they're looking to the private sector to receive large 30, 40, $50 million awards and then subaward those funds out to many, many, many subrecipients. I suspect that you're seeing this in San Diego, Ashley. And that means that the prime recipients, whether they're local governments or whether they're nonprofits, have to be able to manage those subawards, manage invoicing on those subawards. And so systems where as the invoices are coming in, it connects neatly to the budget categories that are necessary to manage at the subaward level. But those are really sort of inside baseball in the weeds items. I would say those three areas are the biggest.
Great. And Chad, I know you've done a tremendous amount of work on this, and so I wanted to kind of let you have the wrap up sort of response to be able to say, yeah, here's what we're doing. Here's kind of maybe what you see next as needed or happening.
Yeah, no, so from the Grants Quality Service Management Office perspective, yeah, we've done a lot of work in this space across government over the last 3 years. And for folks, if you're not familiar yet with the Grants QSMO, simple tagline, we're designated by OMB, live at HHS, but we work on behalf of all agencies as well as applicants and recipients, really to help offer better tools so you can deliver on the grants mission. We do that through shared services. And, you know, I was looking at this slide and this is really interesting. And we've actually done a lot of journey mapping with the Grants QSMO team in the last couple of years with recipients of varying sizes and shapes all over the country, large, small, nonprofits, you know, very wealthy research universities that have super large capabilities and staff, very small communities and tribes, right? You know, interestingly, yeah, these numbers, I got to be honest, they seem kind of low. So when we've done the journey mapping here, I'm wondering, what I thought here was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what's their role in their organization, and you know, because based on your role, you're going to deal with certain systems, you know, at various times. Because what we've seen, the numbers are actually, you know, for any one program, it's somewhere from the 4 to 7 range, and if you're scaling across many programs across multiple agencies in particular, where we haven't had common adoption of our shared services on our marketplace, it goes higher and higher. And I agree, you know, with Scott, you know, in particular, it's like, look, this is not the panacea for solving all of the burden problems for recipients. But what it does is, you know, one, it's like it's an area where obviously the government can and should do better. And again, going back to, you know, thinking about opening the aperture for who we bring into the grants management space and simple ways to reduce burden and toil, you know, navigating between systems is a solvable problem that, you know, has been done in other spaces. We can pass tokens and logins, you know, using the right, you know, authentication tools and authentication levels, just to save time with simply remembering passwords and getting into systems, and even helping recipients navigate, you know, which system they need to use when for which grant for which part of the life cycle they're managing, whether it be application, reporting, payments, auditing. That's possible today, but it takes a lot of work to both reduce the number of systems and also create the data standards so we can actually better share the data between. I will say I am hopeful in this space that we can at least really create the foundation where I think a lot of the gains, you know, for both time and burden savings can be there. We've seen great adoption of shared services over the last 3 years. You know, we're now at a point where, you know, for our marketplace alone, we have over 1/3 of the federal dollars flowing through our grants management services there, particularly the core award management services. And also we see, frankly, you know, folks like REI Systems, Jeff, and others, you know, we see really great possibilities, you know, in work we've done with market research that we've done, you know, where those big shared services may not be the right fit, particularly for small agencies. Really, really great opportunities, again, to help bring together in a smaller number of systems where we can really create that interoperability and really create, you know, frankly, driving improved common capabilities across systems through a smaller number, I think is where we gain a lot of the efficiencies and a lot of the improvements.
Actually, Keaton, if you could advance one slide to slide 19. Part of what I see my job is to kind of poke and provoke, to see if I can get some conversation, maybe some insight. What I'm thinking about is kind of what does the environment look like in 10 years? Kind of what kind of data might be shared? How might systems interact? And let me be really specific, because I see that kind of several different themes from this survey, which is lots of burden, people spending a lot of time on administrative tasks, people not really happy with data sharing, people thinking, hey, maybe we've got more systems than we want. Perhaps let's say in 10 years, instead of having a grant recipient have to go and pull through paper reports or its individual systems and then type them into a new system for grantor agency 1 and a different system for grantor agency 2, maybe what happens is that the agency, the grant recipient, let's pretend it's a local health clinic or a local housing provider in San Diego, has their own data system. And instead of having to retype everything, the data from that system kind of just gets sucked up and pushed up towards HUD or towards HHS. And, one of the ones that's close to my heart is kind of the theory, well, there's an agency in the federal government that provides a lot of funding for primary health care for people who can't access it, don't have a ability to access it. And we can have them kind of those local health clinics type in, once a month or once a quarter, how's the blood pressure of this patient doing? How many times did we see this patient? Or we could say, let's appropriately establish a flow of data that pulls information, not all information, but appropriate information from that electronic health record and sends it straight up the chain. And nobody actually has to touch it or think about it or spend time on it. And that allows then the federal agency to kind of see who and how are doing the best job of implementing our program and improving health. And it means that both the clinic or the state Department of Health doesn't have to touch and manipulate the data and worry about it. So if that's the 10-year horizon, my question is, and this will be first a question for you, Scott, but any others can jump in, who could organize such a vision and then say, all right, in order for that vision to be implemented, steps A, B, C, and D need to happen. So in my mind, kind of, again, this is a potential thinking about the community we're talking with figures out, here's how we'd like to solve a problem. Who is it that then can put that, the rubber to the road and kind of begin making happen in a long-term perspective? What do you think, Scott?
Well, I'm going to offer a not particularly optimistic answer to that question, which I hope you don't mind if I know you're poking and prodding, but it depends who wants the data. If the goal is that the federal agency wants data in a certain organized fashion that becomes a data set that they maintain, first of all, there will be legal barriers to that. They'll be creating systems of records. There'll be Privacy Act concerns. With health, you mentioned health data, so you've got issues that will arise out of HIPAA and also Part 2 for substance use disorder consideration. So if the federal government wants to do that, it would be a system that would be created by the federal government and everyone would submit their data to that system. But that definitely, when you say a 10-year horizon, I think you're talking about a 10-year horizon for something like that. If the point is that there is certain data that already is collected, maybe it's de-identified, it's the type of stuff that everyone's already reporting, and the goal is to have some sort of intermediary system that people can simply go out and purchase. That these, I think you're describing the community health center program, for example, potentially Ryan White clinics as well, that could go out and purchase. And that will simplify the data reporting they're already doing. And if you're talking about the community health center program, for example, it's UDS reporting is what it's called. But in any case, that can be done, I would say, most efficiently by trade associations. And a lot of grantee communities do have trade associations that represent their interests. To the extent that state and local governments are involved in the program, they're not so much in the one that you just described, if I'm correctly guessing the program you're talking about. The states have gotten together with respect to IT purchases through collective purchasing endeavors like WISCA-NASPO with Western, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's an association of Western states that purchase IT together. So that's an option as well.
Let me ask Ashley Gain, we've just described this, and again, it could be related to health, but let's call it could be related to housing. Is that something where if we said, this survey responses say 37% of people's time is spent on administrative activities, not kind of, helping house people or helping improve the grantee performance or what have you. If we said, we could cut that 37% down to 10%, but you would have to kind of open up the kimono and share a bunch more data with the federal government kind of on an automated basis in order to do that. Do you think that's something that either your organization, the City of San Diego, or your sub-grant recipients would say, yeah, we're willing to make that trade-off. We're willing to cooperate?
I mean, I can't speak for the City of San Diego, but I can say as someone who works with highly vulnerable populations, the idea of their data going directly to the federal government would probably scare them off from applying. We work with a lot of undocumented individuals. We work with a lot of, kids in the foster care system. And I know, there's lots of ways where they're already in the system if they're working with us, but we do work really hard to scrub the data, build the trust. Like it's a really intentional process. So I think if they knew that we weren't any kind of intermediary and it was going directly to the federal government, no offense to the federal government, I'm just saying we don't have super high trust, especially in our, high poverty communities.
So the de-identification, the removal of any personal information would be a really high important criteria before any of your participants would want to join that.
I think there'd probably need to be, honestly, like an additional 10 years of building that trust of them seeing that it was de-identified over and over and over again.
Okay. Let's, if you don't mind, Ashley Keaton, flip to slide 20. And this was the topic on artificial intelligence. I was frankly a little surprised that so few are focused on it or at least using it, but I guess it's kind of consistent. We've seen a lot of folks who say, we think artificial intelligence has great promise, but we're not really sure what to do with it. And so I guess my question is kind of, are people either using artificial intelligence, for example, to write grant applications? Is that a good idea? And are agencies who are kind of reviewing grant applications using artificial intelligence? And if so, how and what kind of benefits is it providing? Would any of you like to jump up and answer any of those questions?
Yeah, Jeff, happy to. Actually, can I go back? I'd love to share some thoughts too about the data standards piece, and particularly given the role we have at HHS. So look, I hear everything. Agree with everything that Scott and Ashley said. It's the easiest way to make friends on panels is agree with everything they said. And I think they're right. Like, look, let's acknowledge this work is hard. It's going to take time. I need to have appropriate data sharing controls, right? Of course, particularly with health data. But let's focus on just the grants data for a second. I'm an optimist, and if I wasn't an optimist, I wouldn't be in this job. But look, let's recognize the difficulties and think about how we approach the change and how we manage that change over time to show what's possible, not just talk about what's possible, but show what's possible and have that drive and fuel people to help, bring partners on board to really drive the adoption and the creation of standards and adoption. So look, at HHS, folks are probably familiar with the Federal Integrated Business Framework as well as the GREAT Act. One of the great joys of my job now, I also get to work jointly with OMB, and we co-lead implementation of the GREAT Act and development of those data standards under that act, really building on a lot of the initial work from the FIBIF. Look, the data standards themselves for grants management are, I think, what is going to be key for enabling a lot of these key capabilities. And you're going to see soon, I expect, in forthcoming OMB memos and policy, some of the work that has been happening behind the scenes that I can't publicly talk about just yet about implementation of the GREAT Act itself and building out of those data standards and where we're driving. But some of the goals that we can really achieve, look, it's important to talk about what we can achieve with data standards and then show it along the way. Transparency, helping reduce burden, right? Sharing data across systems like our panelists talk about, absolutely. Can also be a good way to measure the impact of efforts like some of the DEIA efforts to really understand what's the impact of our grants. Are we really getting folks to come and apply for these grants? Are we getting better quality applications? And then really promoting and enhancing performance which is going to be a tough one to crack, right? It requires work in both the policy space and not just creating data standards, creating meaningful standards around how to understand performance data, really to drive resources to those important programs, but also help understand where programs, who's successful. Let's take those lessons learned and build on them. And just, I'll get to your AI question. One quick example of work that our Grants QSMO team has done jointly with OMB's customer experience team, their Office of Federal Financial Management, the White House Tribal Liaison, Department of Treasury, Department of Interior, as well as others at Health and Human Services, particularly the Indian Health Service, is taking this idea about how do we reduce that burden, particularly around data and reporting. How do we reduce the burden for tribes reporting on federal grants? So we're working on a pilot project that was brought to us by OMB and Treasury, really to, one, we went out the tribal conference in Alaska, where a lot of tribal nations were there and trying to help us understand your reporting burden, to actually doing human-centered design, because I didn't just want to write another report. Let's think about, great, we think we understand your burden. We actually go and talk to them and understand it's kind of what we thought and a lot more. And understanding that, designing actual prototypes and tools that we can use, try to help, in an agile method, see what works now, right? See what works now, adopt what works, change what doesn't. And we're working in a couple different ways to, one, do offline reporting for tribes, and this is important for tribes in outlying areas, but even rural communities where internet's, connection is not great. Also, really thinking about ways in which to get easier access to systems. This was unexpected, something we didn't expect as feedback from tribes. We actually had someone in the human-centered design session on a napkin draw out the ridiculously large, messy systems map that they have to deal with as the sole grants manager for their tribe, and how it would be much easier if they had a simple way to navigate across those systems, as well as recognize the roles in all of them across in a common way. And lastly, going back to the beginning, program design. How are we designing our programs? What are we asking for? And you talk about these programs, and your example, Jeff, of the health data. We're looking for ways. How can we work with programs now to understand and think about what's the burden you're placing on them? You're collecting data. How are you using it? Is this required data? If so, what's the value of it? If it's not required data, what value do you get from it? And how can we think about really focusing on what matters in terms of data? For just one program at the Indian Health Service, I think they had upwards of 300 to 400 individual data points they're collecting from one tribal recipient. That's a lot. This is something we can't change overnight. We're not going to change it with data standards, but it's going to be work program by program to think about what really matters, what's really useful, what's really needed. But I am hopeful that that work will come. So sorry for the soapbox, but I did want to say, look, I am an optimist, but not just because we have efforts underway. We actually have interagency work. There is work by not just us, but by others to try to show what's possible, not just talk about what's possible in that data space.
Great, thanks. We do have a question in the chat. I first want to encourage anyone who is listening to post their own questions in the chat. But Heather McCarthy, if you are willing to unmute yourself and ask your question, it relates to training. And maybe Ashley Keaton, we could move to slide 27, I think it is qualified staff. And I'm sorry, slide 25 is where we've got the training focuses. Heather
Am
McCarthy?
I unmuted?
No, yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Please ask your
Hi,
question.
good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking my question. So I find myself on a newish team of grant managers for the city of Buffalo, and we are tremendously excited to be here. We have a number of grants in our portfolios, but we're newly transitioning to grants management. And so we find ourselves working very closely with our federal and state liaisons in order to make these things happen. But for my colleagues, I'm wondering what are some areas or places we could seek out grants management training, especially full life cycle grants management training?
I'm not sure if it'll be the same. I'm not sure which programs you're working in, but for us, the NCDA, the National Career Development Association, hosts a lot of great trainings. For us specifically on HUD funding and CDBG, I'm not positive about other programs, but that is a really good resource that pretty much that's our onboarding after the city onboarding is you go through some NCDA trainings to get familiar with the grants management cycle for CDBG. But I'm not sure if Scott or Chad have any more specific things than that.
We definitely have
Scott
the
has
HUD
an answer.
CDBG.
Linda Swankowski has the answer I thought Scott was going to offer. Scott, do you want to describe the offerings that NGMA can provide?
No, certainly, and I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sell anything either, but the entire purpose of the National Grants Management Association is to represent the interests of grants managers, and one of their most significant interests is in access to training and education, which unfortunately for about 20 years, it's been an area where it's difficult to build those skills. So if you take a look at NGMA's website, there is something called the Grants Management Body of Knowledge Training, and that is a full soup to nuts grant system training. NGMA does monthly webinars, and then there's the annual grant training conference that we actually just had here in Washington, D.C. last week. And it was a convening of 1,600 grant managers from across the country, federal, non-federal, so state, local government, nonprofits, et cetera. So if you're looking for training from an organization that is focused on the grants manager as an association that represents the grants manager, I mean, obviously I'm biased here, but NGMA is fantastic and that's its purpose. And I do want to plug one other thing about NGMA while I have the opportunity, which is that NGMA has a certification called the Certified Grant Management Specialist, the CGMS, and that credential exhibits or exemplifies or indicates that individual has been through a certain amount of grants management training. That credential presently is in the process of being independently accredited, which will make it the only one in the country that is so. So I encourage you to look at those options. There are also a lot of private training providers out there, and if you search around, I think OMB puts up lists. I think the Quizmo might even put up lists, but those can be useful as well.
Thank you so much.
I have a quick note, which is a number of your colleagues in the chat are posting ideas and suggestions. So Mary Abraham stole a part of Chad's thunder by saying grants.gov has some great Grants 101 material. And Sarah DeLorenzo says that CFO.gov has some federal financial assistance training. There may even be a few sorts of academic institutions, let's say, for example, George Washington University, who can offer training not so much in kind of some of the nuts and bolts, but more in a kind of a broader and more academic sense about how, to be effective in managing and focused on grants. So those of you, again, who are not aware, we're recording this. This will be available after the fact, and we will provide both the slides within 48 hours, as well as I think we can certainly provide some of the links that have just been shared in the chat. Chad, did you want to add anything?
I think they covered a lot of it, particularly from the outcome recipient side. In terms of what's happening in the federal space, look, there are resources out there that folks have already named them. Check them out. That's great. Please check out NGMA. Right, I know folks have gone through that as well. Also very good. Things that are happening on the Fed side, both at HHS, where I in our Office of Grants, I also lead our workforce development efforts across our grants workforce at HHS, as well as things that are happening in the new Council of Federal Financial Assistance. Focus on, Office of Recipients. First focus is making sure that we have really great grants managers on the Fed side to help make your life easier. I would love to get to the point where the Fed government's also really focused and able to really help deliver better resources and training for recipients, but we're really focusing on the Fed side first, both at HHS and across the intergovernment. On the intergovernmental side, there's a focus on making sure we really have the right core competencies and skills for grants managers across the space, that we're both able to both train, get knowledge, and also measure ways for success in terms of the impact from folks having better training. And we're doing the same at HHS. But at HHS, we're doing so in a way that also focuses on some of the specific needs of what is a very broad and diverse agency. I will say, though, look, you went over the survey results before. And this is a huge staffing, recruitment, retention, building knowledge and skills and competent staff. This is a huge issue and concern, particularly over the last 3 years where, COVID and funding from that and funding from all the big, infrastructure bills and, just really put a huge crush on the grants management staff across the Fed and recipient space. More than anything other than just training, more and more, I'm really focused on trying to get people excited about working in grants. Like we need to find ways to motivate people and see the impact of that grants has on the American people. I'm a public servant through and through, been so my whole career, so it's easier for me to wake up every day and just be ready to rock in my job, because I can see that direct mission tie to the work I do, and I've done it from both a high level is really close with projects, but grants is one of the biggest ways that the federal government tries to improve the lives of Americans and American citizens and others abroad. And we need to find ways to bring smart, capable people in at all levels to work in this space. And offering the right types of training is just one core component. Yeah.
Let me ask, retention clearly is an issue. And I'm curious because it kind of in the private sector, there are generally a couple of factors around retention. Let me ask you how they are dealt with, if they're dealt with really in the kind of the grants community. So one of the big factors around retention is having a career path and seeing kind of being able to see and understand what are the next steps, what do I need to learn or what do I need to demonstrate as a capability in order to make those next steps if I'm at a stage where I kind of want to advance my career and I'm ambitious. And the other is having a good manager. People generally quit bad managers. They don't often quit a bad employer. Of course, not always true, but my question is, for example, is there a kind of a, hey, from all across government, perhaps strangely, both recipient and grantor perspective, is there a career path that someone could say, hey, within your first 2 years, you should be trying to kind of, have this sort of experience, maybe bring these sorts of skills. And then from kind of years 3 to 5, you really want to make sure you've acquired these additional skills to advance. And here are the types of roles into which you advance. Is there some sort of career path that, people in this community could look at and say, hey, maybe I don't fit all of that, but that gives me some new ideas about both what I could do and what skills I need to be able to do it. Does something like that exist?
If I may, 5 years ago, I would have said, well, maybe. Today, the answer is yes. That is coming into focus because the skill sets that everyone's looking for from grant managers are very consistent. And I don't know that everyone thinks about it this way, but the reality is that a solid grant manager has 3 core competencies, and they aren't a specialist in any of the 3 competencies, but they do have considerable skill in each. And what the grant manager lives in the nexus of law, accounting, and project management. There will, in a large organization or in a state or local government, there will be lawyers that are involved in grants management. The finance department will be involved in grants management, and there'll be project managers that are involved in grants management. But the person who ties it all together and makes it seamless is the grants manager. And that's becoming more consistent across the entire industry. So those core competencies are becoming more clear. Now, I understand your question to be asking, has anyone actually issued in year 1 to 2, this is what you should learn. In year 3 to 5, this is what you should learn. I'm going to take that question back to our executive director at NGMA. I know there's been discussion of it, but I don't know if we've issued anything. It's a wonderful idea.
Chad, is there something like that you're familiar with, or even perhaps you created?
On the Fed side, there are some. There's an older list of competencies that we're working off of that we are updating now across the intergovernmental space through the Council of Federal Financial Assistance, and we're doing similar work internally at HHS to think about both the specific needs for our department. So yeah, it's really focused on the feds though, at least at the time being, and it's being updated. Yeah.
So this, let me offer an illustration. I worked a number of years ago with the Internal Revenue Service, and they had a very specific career path. And what I'm going to suggest is it might be interesting to think, and maybe Scott, you can just add this to your to-do list if you're willing, but to think for the IRS, it was pretty clear. You would start out, for example, in a service center helping process tax returns. You would gain some expertise, maybe some education, then you would start to do audits. Then you would move to headquarters and you would start to do, some sort of policy or kind of oversight role. Then you would move back out to the field and you would take on a kind of a management or supervisory role. And so there was this kind of clear expectation of moving back and forth. The parallel might be from a grantor role to a grant recipient role, from a kind of an individual contributor role to a kind of a manager role, but something that would say, hey, you know what, maybe not everybody wants to make all of these stops, but here are some plausible kinds of connections between roles. And if you get to the top in a really senior role, you probably should have a wide range of this sort of experience that doesn't, again, just talk about, we're thinking you're going to go up exclusively within HHS, but maybe you'll move to Paradise in the city of San Diego for a little while and gain some great skills that will help make you even kind of more of a valuable contributor when you come back to work at HUD. Who knows?
Yeah, I have two comments on that point, actually. So one is that this has been done in the federal government before. It was done for contracting officers. And when it was done for contracting officers, where they would have a career path in which they grew from potentially being contracting officers representatives up through contract specialists, up through contracting officers with limited warrants and then unlimited warrants. That, in my view, at least within DoD, was a really successful endeavor. Contracting officers with unlimited warrants in DoD, they're all different, but they're all competent, or at least mostly competent, right? Humans are humans. It's a really nice career path, and they don't have to stay in one agency. Those skill sets transfer. One of the reasons, the second comment I have, one of the reasons that those skill sets transfer is that you have the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is a much more robust version of what we're kind of trying to do with the uniform guidance. The more that we harmonize the rules, the more that those career paths will exist across the federal government. The more that we have career paths, the more we'll have people who stay in grants management and become grants managers.
Great. So I'm wondering
something, Jeff.
Sorry, please.
As well.
Yeah.
Speaking from a strictly local level, we lost a lot of people at the start of COVID because they didn't want to go remote. So we lost most of our senior members who were either close to retirement or took an early retirement because of it. And I think the challenge that we're having now is that we do have a lot of people who are coming in and want to move up and move through really quickly. And we're hiring for kind of that like superstar mentality, when we could also be hiring for the mentality of finding someone who wants to come in, wants to be a specialist, wants to stay in the role for a long time. And I think it would be nice if there was, and I personally think for the city there is, we have a pension system, the pay is great, like it's a good setup for everyone, but being able to hire knowing that someone wants to come in and they want to stay in the role for 10 years would be incredible, because we lose so much knowledge every time someone decides to jump up a level or jump to HUD or jump to another city. So being able to kind of build out all of those core competencies over time is really important as well.
Are you doing a little bit of recruiting here amongst other members of the audience?
I'm doing recruiting, folks. sandiego.gov/careers.
Okay. We slipped past for a moment artificial intelligence, and I do want to kind of go back to that because, again, I think the kind of the creativity and the communal thought might help say, hey, here's what we could do with AI. So Ashley Keaton, if you could move back to slide 20, I'd just like to ask the panel kind of two questions. One is, have you been getting applications that look like they were written by generative AI? Is that a problem? Is that not? What do you like or dislike about it?
Did receive one application that was very clearly written by AI, and it was upsetting that it was very clearly written by AI. I feel like if you can do it and you can remember to delete out the section that says, because I'm a generative AI, I cannot make a conclusion on this subject, and you can get away with it and actually follow through on what you promised in the application, that's incredible. Save yourself the time. But yeah, people not being careful and putting things through like that. Thankfully, we haven't seen it in reporting yet, but obviously in an application, that is not what we want to see.
Yeah. So you just mentioned something I thought was really important, which is you said, I don't care if you write it with generative AI, you just better be able to follow through and actually do what the generative AI promised. Does that mean something different in terms of due diligence, in terms of how you say, hey, you know what? You didn't write this. I don't believe you can do it, versus someone else who you say, you know what? I believe you can do this. How do you tell?
And it depends. For us, we're pretty familiar. San Diego's a big city, but it's a small city. The nonprofits, the people they're serving. Like you can see if an organization is going to be following through. And we also don't take brand new organizations. You need to have had your 501(c) for at least 2 years before working with us. So it's a little easier for us to kind of
yeah. So maybe your lesson is generative AI may not be a terrible deal in terms of helping write the applications, but it may mean a different type of work and due diligence in selecting grantees and perhaps monitoring them. I wonder whether or not, Chad, from the federal side, a lot of folks both are optimistic. They say, hey, generative AI and AI in general might help me do my job a little more easily. But I think some of them are also afraid of, well, hey, maybe it will mean I don't need a job because the AI can do the work instead of the human. Have you seen much kind of either actual use of AI happening or plans for use of AI in the grants management arena from the grantor perspective?
Oh yeah, I've seen all of that. I've seen the excitement, the optimism, and the fear. Yeah, I can share a couple examples of things that
Please.
are in place or being trying, like they're being tried today, as well as opportunities for the future. Let me just address the first part though. Like, is a AI is a LLM going to take my job? Who knows? But I don't think so. And one of our top folks in the shared services space on our marketplace was talking to about this the other day, and he shared great perspective. It's like, look, AI is most likely not going to take your job. It's going to take the person who doesn't understand how to use AI tools, right? It's the person who understands how to leverage and use those AI tools that'll be more successful. It's going to be an accelerator in the best use cases to help really, you go back to your slide there, and please don't go back in the slides. I didn't ask that. Your slides that showed, how much time you're spending on administrative tasks. I'm going to call that toil. Can we reduce that toil and then more optimally help you get better information to help to make better decisions on awards, on how to manage awards, how to reduce risk, both during awards and before, and then really drive and promote performance. So it's we've seen opportunities that have been tried and have had some decent success so far on the Fed side in all of those areas. I was going to say, please don't be afraid of AI. Also, like, just look, for the last 5-10 years, there's always a different technology, and I think AI is one of the more optimistic ones in terms of use cases, but it's just a tool. We need to figure out where AI can be best applied to what problem sets, and what opportunities and capabilities to drive. So things that are in place today, particularly with some of our shared service providers, let's take one example, Grant Solutions, which operates out of HHS. Great success with this tool for feds called Recipient Data Insights. So this is a risk management tool that pulls together data sets, mostly a lot of financial data, single audit data, grants payment data, and really helps, reduce that toil, and helps improve, and mitigate risks for particularly pre-award risk management. For recipients, where the regs, the unified guidance Scott talked about, requires the feds do pre-award risk assessments. This previously could take hours and hours, and who knows how well that was being complied with for all the grants across the government. Like, these tools offered by our shared service providers cuts that down to minutes, right? And helps you, using various AI type of tools, machine learning, intelligent automation, RPA, ways to aggregate that data and show the grants manager, hey, look, this recipient has performed well for the last X number of years and has perfectly managed their financial data, clean single audits, like they are very low risk, right? And that's not just a yes to do and go, but that's also, yeah, right, you can have a higher level of surety, about, you can let them run, right? Which is what the Fed should do. The Fed should be really thinking about not just who to give money to, but who to help more, where to lean in with terms and conditions, where to lean in with technical assistance, and how to use that, get that better business intelligence and use that information to better help drive performance. So we shouldn't shy away necessarily from the more risky recipients. Sometimes we must, and we probably should be funding those recipients because they're the neediest ones in the neediest communities. Yeah. But we can use that data to really help drive how we engage with those recipients too. We see similar ways. You think about LLMs, and I love, ChatGPT in my home life. Trying to think about simple ways. Look, it's a great way to help improve how I communicate with others. I'm a lawyer like Scott, but I don't practice anymore, so I think I'm an okay writer. But there are times I look at things and like, man, I know I can simplify this. Some of the LLM tools out there are some great opportunities, that are both in use today, and I can really imagine a future where, like, look, for some of the simplifying work for the NOFOs that's being done, there are a couple different efforts on this at HHS, both of which are using, LLM AI type tools to help make things more concise, help things be more in plain language, help identify upfront and early the information people need to know. And you talk about building trust in government. Man, I would love not to have to read through 3 pages of a government form to figure out what the heck I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about ways to fix things like basic communication skills. Those are some of the hardest skills.
Yeah.
It can't do it for us, but it can help. And I can only imagine what it could do. Think about the policy space. Right? Think about the policies that from a recipient perspective, and I've worked a lot with recipients and subrecipients in big communities, small communities across the country, particularly post-disasters where people are really stressed. Man, if we can make our policies easier to use, never mind the rules, never mind the systems, let's start with the policies and how they first engage with the program, and more clearly communicate what's needed, what must be done, how we can help you do it. Think about the opportunities that would, one, open up for others to even engage with the government and not walk away, and really help mitigate the risk as they're implementing a project. I think there are some big opportunities.
So in just a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to kind of offer their final 60 to 90 seconds worth of feedback on either what surprised you the most, what do you think is the big takeaway, what conclusion are you going to draw from kind of the discussion today and the survey results. But I do want to offer, kind of, again, the AI, does it create fear in people for their jobs? My perspective is that after a period of time working in the technology field, actually almost any technology change can create a similar fear. And a really specific example, REI helped automate the process for HHS to certify who is a victim of human trafficking and who is not. And we did it in such a way that replaced essentially kind of emails and telephone calls with an automated system. And it made it possible for that particular agency, the Administration for Children and Families, to certify twice as many victims with the same number of staff as it had done previously. And you could say, well, all those employees should have been afraid for their jobs, but in fact, there was a growing workload demand, and it made it possible for them to do their job without pulling their hair out, because it was something where they weren't likely going to get any more money from Congress and appropriations. The other thing it made it possible for them to do is to do a much better job and to provide more support to the victims, and to do a better job coordinating with USCIS to, for those victims who were certified, to support them in getting a work permit or a residency permit, and to work with the Department of Justice to help prosecute their victimizers. So in many instances, I think that's been the tradition where technology is implemented. Yes, it does make employees more efficient. I have rarely, if ever, seen an instance where an employee was laid off. There have been a few cases where agencies will downsize from attrition, but in almost every instance, it creates the opportunity for the agency to do a better job achieving its mission, which frankly is actually the core motivator of most public employees. They want to do the mission work. That's what keeps them there. And the ability of technology, and I'll hypothesize of AI, is that it will even more expand your ability to do a better job. But off that soapbox, and let me maybe start out with Ashley Gain. What would you say in your kind of final 60 to 90 seconds?
I think I would say it's mostly coming from the chat, but also from the results of the survey as well, that there really is that hunger for development and for PD and growth. And I think that's incredible. And I think if that same energy can also be applied towards the systems that we're using and trainings on the systems, and kind of integrating that with the people, I think it would be incredibly helpful. I think you could build out a lot of people who, I'm seeing in here moving from like internal auditing into grants management. The core competencies are the same, and getting everyone really trained up and well versed on the systems that we need to use, I think would be incredibly helpful at kind of easing a lot of that administrative burden. So overall, though, I mean, it was great to talk with both of you. I'm sorry if I said anything bad about the federal government. I didn't mean it, but I did really appreciate this, and I'm excited by these survey results.
Great. Scott, you want to go next?
Certainly. So the next 10 years, I think, is the future is continued harmonization and standardization. I mean, we're hearing it from Chad. We're hearing Ashley say that's what's needed. I'd say we're at about mile 7 of the standardization marathon, and the uniform guides got us there. Probably the next step, because it's most feasible, is going to be harmonization across the workforce with standards, training, et cetera. And I think the last mile will be harmonization of the dispute system and probably taking some of the appeal authority out of the individual agencies. Once we're there, we'll look a lot more like the government contract system, which everyone lauds. But we're coming along nicely. I really commend, you'll often hear me say things to Ashley's point as well, where I'll say, well, the federal government could do this or that because they really are the driver of a lot of this. But Chad, I commend the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Hey, look, all the criticism, Ashley, I'm pretty sure is warranted where it is. And Scott, I appreciate the kind words. Look, I'm a taxpayer too. And I do expect government to do better. Look, Scott's talking about the marathon. I'm a former marathoner until my knees got bad. So I understand the metaphor. And I think he's right. It's an exciting time to be alive as someone who's working grants for 20 years. And a lot of the groundwork is there. And, your question, Jeff, about the survey, what I see is that, there are enormous opportunities through now really well-established uniform guidance that it is really helping consolidate, how we run the business process of grants. There are better tools and opportunities to consolidate those tools, through things like shared services, as well as, vendor solutions like REI systems and others, right, to help really narrow down the number of systems we deal with so we can drive better capabilities and really connect systems with data. And all of that, look, the Council of Federal Financial Assistance, finally organizing financial assistance in a council level similar to CFOs and CIOs and CAOs in government, which is really important for organizing what is the most diverse line of business the government has. You're talking $1 trillion, 50 agencies, and over 1,500 individually authorized programs. That's a mess. It's not like we have one procurement officer and one CFO in every agency. It's not that. But we're getting there. We're getting well organized. The foundation is there. You know what the survey tells me? People. Focus on the people, right? We have enormous opportunities to drive change across grants management and what we deliver, right, on those missions. But we need to not forget about people first, right? How can we really find a way, to give them the right tools, give them the right skills, really inspire people to come and to stay, right? And to see this as an opportunity, to be part of something that will really change people's lives. That we need to not forget. And that's actually one of the biggest things I take away. It's because otherwise we can do all the fun thing, the whiz bang tools and fun things to improve it, but we will need the people. Don't be afraid of AI taking your job. I need more people to help me drive this change. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
That's great. Let me say two quick things. One is, Chad, I think although there may be a little bit of federal government bashing, I think the survey results seem to say, there's a real appreciation for uniform grant guidance. I think that will likely be true for CAFA as well. I would like to take Scott up on his offer. I think this community would love to hear NGMA's expertise in kind of collaborative development of a kind of a career path and perhaps, levels of knowledge that might be appropriate, in plain English, maybe even feed it through AI to make sure it's intelligible, at each kind of key juncture, like 2 years and 5 years and so on. I would love to also, just making an offer here now, we do these grants management breakfasts regularly. We would love to have a grants management breakfast on kind of career pathing and such. I think that would be a cool thing, especially if it helps with retention. We also have one tentatively planned that will relate to kind of the use of artificial intelligence in grants management. And so those will typically be kind of one or another member of government who's got a bunch of experience in the arena coming, kind of doing a presentation in the same kind of open question and answer format. But I want to thank you all again a great deal for your time and a thoughtful participation both in the event today and in preparation for it. And I'd like to thank our entire audience for some interesting comments in the chat. Again, we will commit to sharing with you the slides as well as key links from the chat after the fact within about 48 hours or so. And of course, Chad or Scott or Ashley, if there's something you really want to make sure gets communicated to the audience at large in that mass kind of note, please share that with us promptly and we can get that out from you as well. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. It's been a great discussion.